Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well today, wherever you may be on this little blue planet. After we did our last little short segment on the continuing saga of synchronicity, I thought to myself, we've got to follow up on this. In fact, I'm going to tell you guys, I'm going to stay on this as long as it takes for us to not so much get to the bottom of what's going on, but to really unpeel and unfurl the layers of what is happening to us and with us, so we can try to make more sense of what's happening. And so for this episode, and I'm going to call this an episode, this is a legitimate conscious commentary today. I wanted to read some of the comments, so many comments that I got from all of you after we did this last episode about a week or so ago, to really use that as a set of talking points. There's some really, really interesting things that have occurred, I would say, in the last week or so since this last episode that I really want to bring your attention to. So again, we're going to stay on this whole idea of what I think is a lot bigger than synchronicity, of course. I think what we're really looking at is the birthing of a new world and a new us. I don't know any other way of putting it. And so we're investigators in a sense, right? We're explorers in this incredible journey, forgive the cliche, hence the reason we call this higher journey. So we are going to stay on this. And as I'm saying that, I'm going to ask you if you would kindly, if you're interested in following along with how we continue to approach the subject of synchronicity and all of the very interesting things that are happening to us these days, please do subscribe so you make sure you don't miss an episode. You know what to do. Hit that notification bell. And if you like this episode, YouTube likes it, I like it, and it helps us, please hit the like button, would you? Okay, enough of that. I might give you another little reminder before we wrap up. Let me just dive in. There are a few comments that I kind of handpicked, wanted to go into. So many of you left amazing insights of your own. And I dare say we've got quite the group of journeyer investigators and explorers. I say explore the mystery, and that's exactly what we're doing. I don't think we're meant, as I think I said in the last episode, to be sitting ducks with what is happening to us, whether it be on the 3D level or on a more subtle level. It's really up to us to explore and find out what universe is really beckoning us to do, how to move through this very unique time. So let's start with a comment. And I took some copious notes here because there's a lot I want to cover, so bear with me. I do have my notes with me today. I'm going to start by reading a comment by Susan W., who says, I appreciate your conversations, Alexis. We need to be looking at these occurrences for sure. I have extreme ear ringing and have had for a couple of years now, but last December I noticed a higher decibel in the ringing. Then a few months ago, another higher decibel started. The number of sequences, on another subject, all of them are so constantly coming up. I get emails from certain people at 11:11. Seems very noticeable. Thank you for all you are doing. And thank you, Susan. I appreciate that comment. We've been really staying on two primary themes here in terms of noticing patterns. I would largely call all of this a form of synchronicity, if you would, but we've got synchronicity that may be in the more classical sense of you're thinking of a friend and the friend calls or texts you. There are myriad examples of synchronicity, of course. I'm going to go into some deep ones today, but also the repeating number patterns. And I don't know how many shows I've done on this at this point, but I will say to you, each time I see my own cluster of synchronicities, including repeating numbers or just very interesting numbers coming up in patterns, I have to ask myself the question. And this also includes, by the way, the physical symptoms, which we'll talk a little bit more about, the ear buzzing, the white noise. I'm going to stay on it, guys. I'm hoping that each time I come to you with these broad subjects that I can bring a little bit more to the table, and I'm hoping I can do that today. But I know for me in my own life, when these things are literally in my face, I mean, as I'm talking to you right now, my ears are on a higher decibel. I'm glad Susan brought that up because it seems to fluctuate in terms of the prominence, the loudness, if you will. There are days, I would say more than not these days, where it's very, very loud. I've just learned to live with it. It's going on right now. Been hearing it more in my right ear. However, I digress. Each and every time these sorts of things happen, to me, the question arises, are we dealing with a process that is 100% organic, meaning the natural growth, evolution, and frequency acceleration of the planet and of us? Or are we dealing with something that could be, let's just say, synthetic, artificial? Or could it be a combination of both? This is where we can get all of us a bit of cognitive dissonance, I suppose, because we're so used to thinking of cause and effect as having, it's either this or that. It's either this cause that's causing this effect, or it's that. It can't be both, but it could be a confluence of both, or an intersection of both. Let me just touch on this, and then I know that I want to come into this a little bit deeper, if I may, a little later on in the conversation. I was thinking about this the other day, and I was thinking about the wonderful, wonderful legacy work of Dolores Cannon, who I so often think of her. I know her daughter, Julia, and as a matter of fact, I'm going to be ringing up Julia. I think she needs to be on the show right about now, because I'm sure she's going through a lot of the processing of the things that her mother talked about so famously in terms of this new earth. We're going to get into that. But as I was thinking about this, what is causing all of this oddness, this wonkiness, this weirdness, this fascinating set of both physical as well as, what would I call it, just scenarios that are happening to us. And the word came to me, there is an organic, here's the thought process that came to me. There's no doubt what I'm calling an organic or natural process that's happening, that's been talked about by the likes of Dolores Cannon and many others throughout the ages. However, there is a convoluted aspect, and I wasn't even thinking of Dolores Cannon's work at the time, but the word convoluted or tangled came to me. And then I thought, Dolores Cannon, and if you know her work, you undoubtedly know her gigantic seminal series of Convoluted Universe books, which I will tell you, I have not read those books. I know generally about the themes in the books, but I have not read them. I think that's going to be my winter reading, frankly. But that's the word or the term or the description that came to me as I was really trying to parse with everything that's happening to us right now. And I'm also going to mention the name Alana Freeland, if you don't know that name. Alana is a consummate researcher who's been really looking at the artificial intelligence, the AI aspects, if you will, of what's happening, that she contends may be triggering some of what we've been talking about, including especially synchronicity, that interestingly has a lot to do with or involves technology. You're thinking a thought, and then you will invariably see exactly what you're thinking or even saying on television. We won't go into that right now, but there is a very curious, what would I call it? There's a very curious element to both sides, and there's a history, I think, to both sides. I'm not going to spell it out here. I got to be careful what I say and how I say it, because you know who is watching the words, but the general sense that I have, or question that I have, really sense as well, is that we're seeing an organic process that's happening that is triggering these synchronicity experiences, including the repeating numbers, including the physiological symptoms, is what I'm going to call them. Organic for sure, but perhaps with an influence, an interference, an intersection, or convolution of something that may not be organic at all. We know that there's a lot of high technology happening, much of which is way beyond our understanding, that has foisted itself upon us in our lives, and I would say not in a good way at all. It's very concerning. And yet, this is the thought that came to mind, rather than say, oh, my ears are ringing because the frequency of the planet and of our avatars are accelerating, or my ears are ringing because we got some technology that's messing with us. I think it could be both, and that could very well be why these symptoms are exacerbated, including the synchronicity and the repeating numbers. I hope I made my point there. Susan, I had to kind of go off on a tangent there based on your comment, but I think that's something we need to think about. We need to not decide, but contemplate, consider the idea that we've got a cornucopia of influences that are happening right now. No wonder the body is freaking out, right? We've got a lot of testing and experimenting going on with folks, and we've also got the planet doing her own thing, and frankly, the whole solar system. I think there was someone that left a comment, in fact, about my thought of this feeling, the sense that I have had, this visceral sense that this planet has been moved. And I think the person said something like, well, how could that be? Wouldn't this whole solar system have to move? I'm not going to answer that question because I don't know. But I do think that the influence is not just on this little blue planet, but rather perhaps the whole of the galaxy. It seems like it's happening right here, but this is our only point of reference, right? Because we're here. So that being said, let me move on to another comment. This is by David Warman, who says he's seeing syncs every day and multiple times. The strange thing, he says, for me is a knowing deep down, even though I have no explanation. Does that make any sense? He asks. Absolutely, David. It does make sense. Well, here's the irony or the paradox. So much of what's happening right now, you can't really ask the question, does it make sense? Because when we think of something as making sense, we're thinking linearly, we're thinking with the left brain. I say this is really the time for us to bring in that right hemisphere of the brain, that more intuitive side, who sits without judgment and says, I'll never forget Penny Pierce use the example of left brain is always trying to work things out, where the right brain is just observing, saying, that's interesting. So to your question, David, does it make sense? Well, I suppose in the large scheme of things, but I would also say that this is the time for us to try to relent a little bit on hitting the gas pedal on the left brain. We've got to learn, and it's hard for me as well, as I'm processing all that's happening to us right now, with me in my world, with you in your world. The left brain is really still trying to stay in control, right? And as I was listening to some of Dolores Cannon's work recently, I thought to myself, and some of the things she said they had been telling her over the years about this new earth, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. I thought to myself, could this really be? I mean, look, guys, as open as I am, I still consider myself a fairly pragmatic person. I feel, if I could make more sense of it with the linear left brain, I guess you would feel a little bit better about it, right? But the bottom line is, part and parcel of this time that we're going through is really working that muscle of that other side, that other part of the hemisphere. The two have to work cohesively. They have to work together. So I'm going to answer David by saying it makes sense if you're looking at it from the more or the less intellectual side of your thinking process, if that makes any sense, right? Seeing syncs every day and multiple times. A strange thing for me is a knowing deep down, even though I have no explanation. I think a lot of what we are seeing now, and a lot of what we are going to be getting ready to see, will have no explanation within the confines of how we define. I think we're being asked to, at a minimum, expand our framework for explanation. I remember Dana Zohar, I don't know if you know that name, incredible physicist and a philosopher, who was talking about the notion of survival of consciousness in the afterlife. And she said, and I can almost quote her many years later to the word, she says, people experience things, and science denies the experience because they don't have the instruments of the moment to measure it. We are used to having the instruments, that left brain, to measure, define, explain, and make sense of phenomena that, frankly, there are no instruments in that, meaning the left brain doesn't have the comprehension to define, explain, etc. So we're being, I feel, challenged to accept and integrate a whole new set of the way we process information and experience. And that's what makes us beautiful. So we're having experiences that are foreign to us, and maybe not for some of you. I know quite a few of you have left me comments about some of these, quote, symptoms or synchronicities or whatever the phenomena is broadly for years, but there's no question that there's an uptick now. So there's no getting away from it. I think it's a matter of how we process and integrate it into our lives. So here are two questions that not really questions, comments that I'd like to make a comment about. We'll start with A11. A11, you're such a wonderful, loyal journeyer. Whenever we have live streams, A11 is always there. So I hope you're doing well. Let me read what A11 said. I definitely feel that there is a change in vibration. It's like I jumped to a higher dimension where I am more sensitive to everything. I really feel different, but my hubby and a friend or two think I'm crazy. Why do they not feel this change? Let me go right to another. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. I hope I am. Chagall, Chagall. Chagall, forgive me if I'm not pronouncing it right. It says, how about all of us that don't feel anything? No earbuds, etc. What kind of humans are we? Both of these questions have to do with the idea that out of, 7.5 to 8 billion people on this planet, relatively speaking, it's only probably a relative small portion that are having some of these things, or a set of these things that are happening, where there are many, many millions of others that have no idea what you're talking about. They're not feeling it, they're not noticing it. So you've got one individual, A11, who is clearly having these experiences and taking notice of them, where another person is not. Now, there are a couple of things that could be happening here. Like many of you, I have always had a proclivity, let's just say, for noticing patterns. I think it may just be the way our brains are wired. Perhaps we could go deeper than that, but for the sake of argument, let's just say we're wired for looking at patterns. I've always been. I can't not look at them. I think because I'm always looking at reality in the larger scope of how does this work. So those of us who have this habit of looking for, or even just noticing patterns, we're putting pieces together. Where I would say this other individual, Chagall, says, what about those of us that don't feel anything? Well, my question to you, Chagall, is, have you been paying attention? I think a lot of synchronicity experiences, including repeating numbers, can go unnoticed. The brain is a very interesting thing. Remember, if that left brain is still dominant and you're refusing to relent to how that process works, there quite likely could be many of these things happening to you, but it's not being processed by the left brain because it's not wired to notice things in that way, and thus can miss patterns. So part of the answer to the question for Chagall, again, apologies if I'm not pronouncing your name right, is that I would dare say, if you were to commit perhaps to being more open to some of these things happening, or open to the fact that they are happening to you, and being committed to sort of putting some puzzle pieces together and connecting some dots, you might notice that they are happening to you. Maybe not, and that's the other part of this. So this is a big one, and this will bring me back to Dolores Cannon's great work as she talks about what she called the new earth. Now, for those of you that don't know, and I have a feeling a lot of you that are watching today do know full well what I'm talking about when I refer to, within the context of Dolores Cannon's work, the new earth. In a nutshell, let me back up for a minute. Her idea of the new earth, not really her idea, but what she was told when she went into this deep hypnotic state with many of her clients, and this sort of stream of consciousness would come through from what she referred to as the collective, giving her information. She said unequivocally that what they would say to her on repeated occasions is that the earth will eventually split into two, bifurcate, not figuratively speaking, but physically. Something I heard her say, I listened to recently, of course, this was quite a few years ago at this point. I think, if I'm correct, she described it this way, and I think this may have even come from another source. You think of the earth as one body, one being. Think of it as a single cell that gradually separates into two cells. It starts out as uni, one, and then becomes multi, two, maybe even more than two. And it's very complex, and this is really not the venue to go into it to that extent. But this, it seems, is what's happening. And what she would talk about, what Dolores Cannon would repeatedly reference, is the idea that there are going to be some individuals, and I say some, we're talking millions, perhaps, large, significant numbers of individuals who are going to naturally be resonating, or will feel more of a resonance with the features of this new earth, new rules of engagement, new scenarios, new opportunities. Eating habits will change. She talks about that a lot. She talked about symptoms, and I've got to go into this. I'm going to see, guys, I'm going to get Julia Cannon. Mark my words. That's why you got to subscribe, because I'm going to get Julia Cannon. We're going to have this conversation, because I know she's reflecting on so much of what her mother taught and what she talked about. But she did talk about, let's talk about some of the symptoms for a minute. I'm going to take my time on this because there's a lot to cover. Stay with me. Don't go anywhere, because it's going to get better and better. Dolores Cannon, when she talked about what would be indicative of becoming acclimated and eventually residing on this new earth, she talked about symptoms. She talked about heart palpitations becoming part of that package. In terms of we're talking about physical symptoms, obviously. She talked about dizziness. What have I been going through, and what have a lot of you that have reached out to me talked about, this vertigo and dizziness. And then as I'm watching this, I said, oh, please, Dolores, mention the ear buzzing or ears ringing. That was the next thing she said. One of the primary features of this frequency acceleration and your being setting the framework for your being able to exist on this new earth. Now, look, this is up for debate, of course, by those out there. They're still thinking with their left brain entirely. But I found it interesting. Even me, guys, I'm saying, really, is this what's really, really happening? But I got to tell you something. This is something that Dolores Cannon was talking about years ago. And is this not coming to fruition to a large extent now? Now, she does talk about the fact, and again, I think what I was watching most recently was a lecture she gave pre-2012. So we're talking over 8 years ago. One thing she said markedly is that, let's assume it was 2011-ish, and even before, that the symptoms would be gradual. This is not an acute event. This is something that has an arc and will gradually become more prominent and prevalent. Now, for me, although I've been looking at some of these features, including synchronicity, for quite a few years and noticing them, obviously the number patterns of 1111 and beyond, there has been a marked acceleration in the last 9 months or so. But you have to ask the question, are we moving into a new earth? Is this the reason why I had this feeling sense that the planet had moved? Like I said, this has nothing to do with science, not from where I'm coming from. Remember, there are no instruments at this moment to measure what's happening right now. The instrument is here. The instrument is not left brain. I think it's right brain and heart. I think it's all of our being, frankly. To heck with trying to explain it. There's nothing to explain anymore. The rules of engagement are different. So I hope I didn't digress too much. So one of the things that she said, without going too far from the two comments that were made about, well, what about the people that aren't feeling anything? Well, quite simply, it could be that those people, whether consciously or unconsciously are not going to go to the new earth. Now, does that mean they're going to die? No, not necessarily. I don't know. But I do know that there are plenty of people, and I would dare say the majority of the individuals, I don't know because I have not surveyed the planet, but we know, guys, journeyers, that these symptoms, feelings, encounters, heck, we can go all the way back to experiencers of the ET UFO phenomenon. Is it the majority of the planet consciously? I don't know. One of the things that Dolores Cannon, again, would reiterate about, for those who aren't going to the new earth, and I always put this in quotes because what's new? There's nothing new under the sun. Different, let's just say. She said, oh, they'll be fine. They'll catch it on the next time around. She had such a great sort of a way of framing things. I think in the end, we'll all be fine, whatever that looks like and feels like to you. But clearly there are some, I would dare say, those who are more inclined to be sensitive and empathic, that are primed to be noticing these patterns, and certainly some of the things that are happening to us physiologically. I don't know if that's a clear-cut answer for you, Chagall, particularly, but again, the one thing that I would say to you is the fact that you are noticing that these things are not happening to you may be an invitation to start to notice. Because maybe, I mean, why did you tune into this particular show? I'm curious. Is there some even remote chance that you're interested in these things? I think the invitation is for everyone, frankly. Some of us just may be more naturally wired to notice and understand. All of us have the invitation, however. I believe that every single one of us, I think I've said this before, is being invited to evolve, is being invited, but you got to RSVP. So there you have it. I'm going to move on because I'm watching the clock, and I said I'm not going to take too much longer, but there are a few things I want to get to. Here's a comment from Dawn, and again, forgive if I'm pronouncing incorrectly. Shumaki, Dawn, you know who you are. So Dawn says 33s every day, 2 to 3 minimum, coming in all forms, from a quick glance at a clock, length of random video, friend sharing a story where it's mentioned, person I haven't spoken to in years calling randomly. So there's one synchronicity at 1:33 or 2:33, on and on and on in so many forms. It started back in March. It's quite incredible. The numbers. We cannot avoid the number thing. I have been trying to dive into the mystery more specifically, or I think toward the beginning, more having to do with the 11s, but it's now clearly bringing in all sorts of numbers. We have individual people that are seeing a certain number, and it may not be, it could be any number, but the fact that you're seeing it repeatedly, you may have a particular relationship with it. What's happening here? Now, I've lectured on this a bit. I incorporated, in fact, the 11 phenomenon in a lecture I did a couple of years ago, really looking at the idea of binary code. And could the binary code be messages from non-human intelligence coming through? We see numbers, but there's a language. That being said, and I still think that's on the table for discussion, but the fact that we are, again, noticing these number patterns so incredibly profound, in a profound way, looking at this in the larger scope of things with what we're talking about, if we are being invited to interact with new rules of engagement, aren't those numbers part of that package? We know that numbers are more than just digits. They are a language. Heretofore, we, particularly in the Western world, and frankly all over, we don't talk in numbers. You know, numbers are how you add and subtract and multiply, and for you physicists out there, you physicists and those in the sciences know that it's a language. But now it's starting to touch many more of us in many more profound ways where it can't be ignored. It's beckoning us to try to decipher It could be that in, I don't know, 20, 30, maybe less years, we will be communicating in numbers. We may be communicating telepathically. This is all on the table. This is part of the acclimation period. If you're seeing these numbers, there's a message behind them. What are the patterns that one might put together in this regard? So I do think that we need to learn the language. I'm reminded of the show that we did with Terry Lovelace about 3 or so weeks ago. I'll link that. Make sure you watch that. We talked about a lot of things. Terry Lovelace is a longtime experiencer, has quite the profound story. But in this particular show that we did, he talked about how his experiences or encounters, I should say, with one particular being would always come at, I think it was 3:33. The bottom line is the inexplicable experiences, the experiences and encounters of high strangeness seem to be associated with repeating number patterns. So in his case, it would be the precursor to an experience coming in. But we did talk about that, and that's coming up a lot. There are meanings, there a language, and we're being asked to start the process of deciphering so we too can speak in those numbers. Occult leanings, and I say occult, not using that term in a bad way at all, a negative way. Occult simply means hidden. You know that. Know and have known throughout millennia the significance of numbers and how they speak a language. Our indigenous cultures spoke or communicated in numbers. It's really all over. It's being used right now. But I think universe, as I say broadly, is beckoning us to start to, it's like you learn any other language, right? You want to learn, a second language or a third language. It works, the rules of engagement are completely different. So I think that's one of the things that we're being asked to do. Make it your business. If I'm seeing 333 or 1111, ask, what are you telling me? Or what do I need to know here? I'm going to give you an example. And it's so funny because I sucked at math. And yet now, do you know I still have it? I'm going to digress for a minute. I still have a recurring dream every once in a while about being in college and flunking. I don't think I flunked my math class, one of my math classes. I took an incomplete because I was mortified. Never was a numbers person until I myself realized that numbers are indeed a language. There's something elegant about numbers, and there's a philosophy that's associated with numbers that I've always found fascinating, and I didn't necessarily have that epiphany until much later, once I got into my metaphysical studies. I still have no desire to take calculus or understand it or look at equations in that way, but I do have a respect for numbers because they spell out concepts. They give information. Here's one I'm going to give to you, and I'm hoping against hope that I do. Oh, 33, just as I looked at the clock here, or looked at my time. Hope I'm not going to run out of battery life. This is important, guys. Listen to this one. We're going through something that it's called COVID-19. I'm going to spell it out. COVID-19. Again, one day, in a moment of reflection, I had a thought. Every letter obviously has a number associated with it. I'm going to take each of these letters and the numbers. I have a feeling that the number that will come up as a result from a numerological perspective, which you always bring down to a single digit, will tell me something. What is this all about? What is this time period all about? Well, I took C, which equals 3, 0, O, which is the 15th letter of the alphabet, V, which is the 22nd, I, which is the 9th, D, which is 4, 19, COVID 19. I added it up, I came up with 63. You take it down to a single digit, you come up with 9. COVID 19 equals 9, numerologically. And what is 9? What's the significance of 9? Among other things, It's the end of a cycle and the ushering in of a new cycle. What are we going through right now? Based on all that we are hearing from the more spiritually rooted aspects of this discussion, that we are winding up the old world and getting ready to birth anew. So all of what we're seeing on the 3D, as painful as it is and as mind-boggling as it is, from my perspective, this is what those numbers, the significance of the numbers that I just had the sense to add up. COVID 19 equals 9. Add it up for yourself and look it up numerologically. 9 is very, very significant. We're not in a 9-year, we're actually in a 4-year in terms of the 2020. However, it does seem that we are getting very, very, very strong hallmarks of the end of one cycle and the beginning of another. I'm going to try to move this forward a bit because there's so much here. When you take simply 19, COVID 19, 19, you get 10, which equals 1 numerologically, 1 being the beginning of a new cycle. So my point is this true or not? I don't know. We're not rationalizing and trying to think this through and explaining it with the left brain. We're looking at it symbolically. Hence the reason why I think we're being acclimated and being thrown all these repeating numbers constantly. Universe is saying, if you start to pay attention to these numbers and connect it to different things and allow yourself to sit in reflection and say, when you hear a word, let's say, like this was the word or the term that was coming to me. And I'm just kind of wired this way. I took those, each letter, added them up to see if it came up with a number that would be significant to me. This is part of that language that I think can be very satisfying and gratifying once you get accustomed to doing that. Now, I'm not saying every word or meme or that comes up in on your screen of space, oh, I better add this up and see what it means. You can drive yourself crazy with that. But particularly when you have terms that are coming up that are prominent in your life or on the larger stage, if you will, add up those letters to the number equivalent and see what comes up and see if there's a significance for you there. I think that is one of the ways we can acclimate ourselves to what on earth these repeating numbers mean, because they mean something. Okay. I went way too far there. In fact, there was something that I was going to share with you, but I think I'm going to wait until we're going to try to kick back in more conscious commentary episodes. And I think I'm going to save what I had planned on talking to you about to the next one, because we've gone quite far. We're almost at 40 minutes. It's stunning, everyone, what's happening, but it's exciting nonetheless. And I think if we, again, allow ourselves to take our foot off the gas pedal with the left brain, bring that right brain in, let it take its proper place of prominence, and learn how to bring equilibrium to both, because we're still living in the 3D, but you've got this other aspect that's coming in to meet us halfway. We'll be so better for it. So better for it. There's a lot happening here. Listen, I want to remind you, if you haven't had a chance to go to the Higher Journeys blog, this is a whole nother, I guess you would call it a subdomain of Higher Journeys. Higher Journeys, of course, higherjourneys.com is where you'll find all the shows and a lot of great stuff. But we now have blog.higherjourneys.com. And I'm pointing you to that because there's an article that we recently published. Actually, it was Penny Pierce, intuitive expert Penny Pierce, who wrote an article about COVID-19 and how it's speeding us toward what she calls transparency, speeding us toward this new world. I'm going to link that at the bottom of the show as well. I would love for you to read that. She's got a really great perspective, not unlike what we've been talking about today, but you know, a lot of us are kind of feeling this way. I think we know intuitively, guys, that we are moving into this new world. Whether we go kicking or screaming or with our hearts and minds open, that's up to you. But it's happening, and I don't think there's any way we can avoid that anymore. So here we go. Okay, let's see if there's anything else I want to bring up. Yeah, I'm going to leave this other part because this could be another story, another show in and of itself. It has to do with some crazy synchronicities I had in the last week, but and some quite profound and even sad in a way. Let's leave that, but very, very powerful. We'll leave that for the next one. Okay, what's coming up? Before I close out, I'm so excited. We're going to stay on the theme, guys. We're going to keep talking about synchronicity. We're going to talk about the wild and weird and crazy and wonderful high strangeness. How would you like to meet your future self? You think you could? Well, I know someone that says she did, and you know her too. Her name is Cynthia Sue Larson. She's going to be our guest next week, next Wednesday. We're going to come back with the guest episodes. I've had so much going on. Please forgive me. We kind of missed out on a couple of episodes, but we're coming back. And Cynthia will be my guest. Cynthia and I are going to talk about, particularly at this very potent time, if the things that we did not think were possible are possible now. Could we meet our future self? She's going to tell you about how she met hers many years ago. And moreover, if we could actually interact with our future self, what could we glean from he or she? So stay tuned for that. That's next Wednesday on Higher Journeys. I think that's it for now. Don't forget to subscribe because we got a lot of good stuff coming up. That's about all I have to say for today. Have a great rest of the week. Actually, it's Friday. Have a great weekend wherever you may be on this little blue planet. I know what's going on here. You can't see it, but it is snowing here. I didn't even have a chance to get the cushions off of my patio furniture, but we'll let it go. All right, Journeyers, I love you all. I will talk to you soon. Thanks for hanging with me, and I hope you got something out of our little chat today. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.